ready to go? We're ready to go? Good morning. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning at the San Diego Natural History Museum as we share some exciting news about a discovery made right here in San Diego. I'm Judy Gradwell, President and CEO, and I'm very pleased to be here with the authors of the paper. Field monitors from the San Diego Natural History Museum were working on a routine paleontological monitoring job on a Caltrans freeway improvement project in San Diego when they came across Mastodon bones that yielded what turned out to be the earliest evidence of human activity in the Americas. The specimens, which were found in 1992, have been the subject of research efforts over many years, which have resulted in an article that is scheduled to appear in tomorrow's issue of the science journal Nature. Several of the authors will be sharing more about the discovery in the next few minutes, but before they do, I'd like to acknowledge all the authors of this paper, many of whom are here with us today. This discovery underscores the importance of paleontological mitigation work and laws to protect these specimens. It also speaks to the importance of ongoing scientific research in our region that continue to yield clues about our past. There is still so much to learn and discover. I should note that we're live streaming this press conference to media outside San Diego, and after a few of the authors speak, we will open it up for questions, including questions from the media who are joining us remotely. Now, I'd like to introduce our own, Dr. Tom Desmarais, Curator of Paleontology and Director of Paleo Services here at the San Diego Natural History Museum.
Well, thank you, Judy. This has been a long, hard slog, hasn't it been? Yes. It's been a story of scientific discovery. And as scientists, we follow the evidence no matter where it leads, even if it leads to something as surprising and extraordinary as finding evidence, the oldest evidence for humans here in the New World at a freeway construction site right here in urban San Diego along the South Bay Freeway. Near an off-ramp. Who would think that in this sort of setting we would find such a startling, make such a startling discovery? And this paleontological and archaeological odyssey, as Judy indicated, began a long time ago, 24 years ago in 1992. Richard Cerutti, the discoverer of this site, was doing monitoring of construction activities alongside Caltrans operations and found this remarkable site that preserves the partial remains of an American mastodon in association with evidence, as we've interpreted, of human activity. And while this association of extinct Pleistocene mammals with evidence of humans is really exciting in and of itself, it's the 130,000-year age of the site that's really the most extraordinary result of our research. And I realize that 130,000 years is a big number when we're thinking about the early peopling of the Americas, especially when you consider that currently the oldest widely accepted date for humans in North America is 14 or 15,000 years ago. So this is an order of magnitude older. But of course, as a scientist, I realize that extraordinary claims such as this require extraordinary evidence, and we feel that the Cerutti Mastodon site, as we've named it, as you can see right here, that the Cerutti Mastodon site preserves such evidence as expressed in a series of really compelling taphonomic patterns that we discovered in the field, and as we continue to analyze the results of the field work that we discovered in the lab as well. And these include the occurrence of spirally fractured bone and molar fragments of this mastodon, broken, sharply broken. The differential preservation of largely intact, more relatively fragile ribs and vertebrae alongside sharply broken bones of the leg bones, which are much more robust, and this juxtaposition of really relatively intact, fragile bones, otherwise fragile bones, and these remarkably dramatically broken bones is a really interesting pattern of this site. Also, the presence of 5 large cobbles in association in this fine-grained sediment with these bones, and the presence of stone, bone, and molar refits. In some cases, we had fragments of rocks that were found in close association with fragments of bone, but 10 feet away was the rock that those fragments of rock came from, suggesting a kind of a paleo crime scene investigation where we had the evidence preserved in place of activities that occurred 130,000 years ago, pretty remarkable. And then the concentration of elements around 2 stone tools that appear to be anvils, but Steve will talk, and Richard will talk more about that in a moment. And then the occurrence of some unusually positioned parts of this animal, including one of the tusks that's vertical, penetrating from the bone bed into the underlying strata, which is, how do you do that, right? But after 24 years of study of these patterns, a study that really greatly accelerated in 2008 when Steve and Kathy Holland joined this research adventure, and with fortunately advances in radiometric techniques and the careful work of Jim Pacey's from the U.S. Geological Survey, we can say with confidence that Cerutti Mastodon site presents strong evidence that humans were processing mastodon limb bones here using hammerstones and anvils, and that processing occurred at this site. Again, this kind of crime scene investigation going back 130,000 years. As a paleontologist, though, it's really amazing to have discovered a site of such importance in our own backyard, and to realize that in this distant past interval when Ice Age mammals such as direwolf and horse and tapir, camel, bison, ground sloths, mammoths, and mastodons were part of a community of organisms that we can now confidently say also included early humans. We've done a lot of work in rocks of this age here in San Diego County, but we've never thought of humans as part of that biological landscape. And today, though, we're excited to announce that the results of our research are being published in the journal Nature after extensive peer review, a hard, long year of back and forth between the editors and our reviewers. Here with us today, though, to tell us more about the archaeological significance of the site is the lead author, Steve Holland, with the Center for American Paleolithic Research.
Well, thank you very much, Tom, and I really want to thank the paleontologists for finding this archaeological site. As you know, archaeologists really don't look in deposits, geological deposits this old. So today I want to talk about the archaeological evidence that indicates to us that humans made this site. The first key thing is the geological context. As Tom mentioned, this is very fine-grained silt and sand, very low energy water deposition. So we know that this wasn't caused by a flood or something like that. These stones had to be brought in there by humans because these large stones don't occur naturally in this kind of sediment. We also know from the fracture patterns on the bone, we see big impact notches on the bone from a rock hitting the bone. These are big, thick limb bones from the mastodon, the femur. And we have done experiments. My research partner, Kathleen, and I have done 2 experiments breaking elephant bone with large rocks to reproduce these kind of fracture patterns. And we can reproduce the same kinds of notches, the little cone flakes that occur around the impact notch, and the evidence from the anvil underneath where we get wear patterns from the bone lying on the rock anvil. So we have use wear evidence on the rocks themselves. Dr. Richard Fulliger from Australia joined the team. We sent him some of these rocks and didn't tell him how old the site was, and he said, yes, these are hammers and anvil. And then we told him how old the site was, and he continued on the project, thank goodness. So, and then we brought him over here to look at all of the rocks, and he's done an excellent job of defining the use wear patterns on these stones, and then comparing them with the experimental rocks that we use to break elephant and cow bone. So it's very conclusive evidence because the wear patterns and the breakage patterns look just alike. We have excavated sites similar to this in the Great Plains, mammoth sites with these same kind of fracture patterns on them, and published a chapter indicating that we thought humans were in North America 30 to 40,000 years ago based on this kind of evidence. But out in the Great Plains, we never found the hammers and anvils with the bones. So this was so exciting when Kathy and I first came here in 2008, when we saw the rocks with the bones and the same kind of fracture patterns. But once I realized in my mind how old this site was, I could not believe that humans were here at that time. It went against everything that I had ever been taught and everything that I ever thought I knew. So it was quite shocking, and biggest shock in my scientific career. But I knew that we had to go ahead and publish this work. So there's no evidence that this site is a kill or butchery site. We feel that it is only a bone processing site. We have evidence that people were breaking open the limb bones of this mastodon, and we presume this is for possible marrow extraction for food, but probably also to take large pieces of this bone away and make bone tools out of it. We have evidence in Africa that people have been using elephant bone to make bone tools out of since about 1.5 million years ago. This technology spread out of Africa as humans advanced across the different continents and came into the New World with early humans. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I will. Hi, my name is Jim Paces, and I'm a research geologist with the U.S. Geological Survey. And one of the things that I do is something called Quaternary Geochronology, which means that I attempt to take geologic materials and discover what their ages are using a technique called uranium series disequilibrium. Those materials are typically less than 500,000 years, which is sort of the upper limit of the technique that I use. And I was introduced to Steve back in 2011. We were both working on the Cerutti Mastodon, no, not the Cerutti site, the Snow Mastodon site near Snowmass, Colorado. But Steve realized that I was trying to do some dating up there. He told me a little bit about the Cerutti site and the fact that it was an archaeological, it had an archaeological context to it, and asked whether I would become interested in dating some of those bones. So I said yes. And the thing that I do is I look at uranium and its natural decay products to thorium, of various different isotopes. And by knowing what the decay rate is of uranium to those isotopes, we can look at the present day composition and then back calculate how long it took for those materials to evolve to that composition. So later that year, in 2011, Tom sent me a couple of bones which had low archival quality to them, and they were more or less used as scoping materials. When it turned out that that preliminary results looked like they were between 110 and 120,000 years, I thought that the project would be over. I mean, it was an archaeological site, right? And things archaeological here don't get that old. But both Steve and Tom wanted to pursue the argument, so I spent the next couple of years refining those numbers and coming up with a defensible age for the Cerutti bones themselves. So it's been a long, hard process. This is the results are based on 100 analyses or so of various different pieces of bone material, and in particular profiles across the thick, compact cross sections of these limb bones, and it's a technique that has been proven sound in a number of different environments, and we anticipate that people will be curious to see if they can't replicate those results. But what we ultimately came up with was an age of about 131,000 plus or minus 9,000 years, which has been already said extends the date that we know humans now have been in this continent by about 100,000 years or more. And I guess with that, I'll turn it over to Dan Fisher from the University of Michigan, who's seen a lot of these different kinds of sites throughout the world. Dan?
Thank you, Jim, and all the previous speakers, and all our authors, to be sure. We paleontologists and archaeologists are fond of saying that every specimen has a story. But those stories are not necessarily evident from the beginning. It's our job to collect the evidence, interpret that evidence, and eventually formulate and report that story to our peers. And as you can tell from the number of years we worked on this and from the year-long review process, that's often a very difficult challenge. With the Cerutti site, we know that the bones are from a mastodon. In fact, we know which bones they are. We can even identify many of the small fragments of bone. We know which bones are not there. One of the things we don't know for sure is how this animal died, nor whether humans had any part of that. We suspect, just based on the odds, that they did not. What we do know, however, is that after the death of this animal, humans came along and initiated a process that's been mentioned already here of harvesting marrow. You might not think of that as the tastiest piece of an animal, but in fact it has high nutritive value. And they also then harvested, that is collected, the dense cortical bone from these leg bones. And again, we wouldn't think of that material as necessarily useful, but to an early culture that was dependent on having hard, sharp-edged fragments that they could use for cutting and scraping and chopping, these bones were their own small gold mine. What's unusual and particularly compelling about this site is that it offers so many different kinds of evidence. And these all, moreover, come together as one interpretation that in the end is almost unavoidable because of the way in which the complex lines of arguments interweave with one another. It's not just one thing and another thing that's different and another thing that's different still. It's things that provide context for one another and allow us to, in the end, rule out alternative interpretations. To just indicate something of my background for contributing to this project, I've been excavating mastodons and mammoths in the Great Lakes region of North America for almost 40 years. And I've been working in Siberia for about 20 years. That's mostly on woolly mammoths. And in both of these regions, I've found sites with the same kind of evidence of intentional bone fracture that we see here at the Cerutti site. So for someone with that experience, this is a very familiar language. The observations come easily, and you begin to integrate an interpretation of what they mean. At this Cerutti site, I would say that we have every bit as strong an argument for human association as we do at any of the other sites that I've worked on, certainly, either in North America or in Russia. Our research team has definitely examined alternative theories, that is, explanations other than the ones that we're featuring for you now, alternative theories to explain the patterns of bones and teeth and stones and how they're broken and scattered and the way that we find them at this site. But in the end, the evidence points very clearly to humans being involved. We can rule out basically all of the natural processes not involving humans. They just don't fit the evidence. And what that means is that our work on this site really fits into a pattern of work that's ongoing in other places around the world and that is collectively pushing back the time frame for human dispersal to many parts of the world. Of course, the local interest in this is that this is San Diego's chance to contribute to the expanding knowledge of human history. So we appreciate your interest, and I think shortly, if not now, we'll be happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you all for sharing your expertise with us this morning. As a recent transplant to this area, my personal conclusion about this research is that even early humans wanted to live in San Diego. We're displaying some of the specimens that were found at the site right here behind me, and this display will be up at the San Diego Natural History Museum through the end of the summer. And so everyone will have a chance to get a close look. We're also inviting scientists to come and take a look, and I think there will be a lot of follow-up to this. This is the type of research that raises as many questions as it answers, and I'm sure we have a lot of questions both here and online. So with that, we will have an opportunity at the end of the formal part of the program for one-on-one interviews, and our PR team, if you can raise your hands, will be able to set those up, and all of our authors are available to speak with you. So at this point, I'd like to see if we have any questions from our guests here or those joining us online. I know we've got online questions.
We've got one question from Nir Hassan. Do you think that now it will be necessary to re-examine other sites in North America to look for evidence of ancient human activity?
Do you want to do that one? Okay.
Yes, this is Steve Hollen again. Yes, that is actually our plan, to go ahead and start doing field surveys looking for other sites of this age. Again, archaeologists have not looked in geological deposits this old before, so we are definitely going to be doing some of that in Southern California. We're also going to continue our research looking at museum collections, because when Kathy and I have gone to numerous museums and looked at the paleontological collections, we've seen some of these fracture patterns on bones. So the idea is then to go date those bones, see how old they are, and then see if there's anything left of the site to see if it's an archaeological site. And I think Tom would like to comment on maybe even collections right here.
Value of our collections.
Yes, well, this has caused us to re-examine the collections that we hold here at the Natural History Museum. Collections that we have built up over the last 174 years. No, since 1874, I should say. I'm sorry.
143.
I can't add today, but
The geochronologist.
yes, we need the geochronologist. But anyway, so a re-examination of our collections is in order, and we actually have one or two sites that actually Richard was involved with, both of them, that are suspiciously similar in some respects. Unfortunately, we didn't collect those sites as carefully as we did this. We didn't have the luxury of 5 months on a construction site that we did at this site. But anyway, so we will be looking more at those collections.
Michael, did you have another one?
Yeah, we have another question from Richard Garcia. It is, do you think there's a possibility that it could have been humans other than the members of the genus Homo?
Let's get Richard to come up and talk about that. This is you.
Could it be species other than Homo?
Steve, just stand close.
Okay, so this is Richard Fulligar. I'm an Australian archaeologist. I'm sorry?
Who were they is the question.
Excuse me, let me rephrase that. Other members of the genus Homo, sorry.
Right. Okay. No, I don't think anyone's arguing that. We think it's most likely that it's a member of the Homo genus. And the reason for that is that you've got several members of the Homo genus in Eastern Asia at that time. It includes, at roughly 130,000 years ago, you have Neanderthals, and by genetic information, by ancient DNA, we can identify Denisovans, who are sort of distant cousins of Neanderthals. There's also modern humans, anatomically modern humans, so an early form of our species present in China between about 80 and 120,000 years ago. So that's not totally out of the ballpark, but it's a little bit further south. And in Southeastern Asia, there's other evidence of surviving Homo erectus at about, I think, 140,000 years or thereabouts. So all of these are within the time frame, but we have to remember also that it's not just an individual member of these species, but there's interbreeding between these different groups at various distant times in the past, and while they were present closer to the migration routes into North America. So it may be that it's a mix or a blend or a hybrid of these different different species of the same genera.
So to follow up on that, another question from Richard Garcia. So there are no sites older than 40,000 years old in Siberia or Northeast Asia. How do you explain this 60,000 year or more gap?
Do you want to take that?
That's right, yeah, that's fine. The gap is an important one, but let me just emphasize again that we're not necessarily talking about the most recent migration out of Africa, by which we can identify the presence of modern human species in Europe and in Australia. In Europe, it's around about maybe 50,000 years, and in Australia, 40 to 50,000 years, probably close to 40,000 years, and in Australia at about 60,000 years. And so this is what some would call Homo sapiens sapiens, so it's our species. But there's also, apart from that migration, which is documented genetically and by all sorts of evidence, including the earliest rock art and other forms both in Europe and in Eastern Asia. And the gap between around about 130,000 years down to the next documented presence of humans in North America is an important one. There's two things that I'd say about that before I hand over to Steve Holland on this issue. One of them is that human remains are incredibly rare anywhere, and at 100,000 years ago or earlier, they're extremely rare. And so the fact that we haven't got human remains in that gap is not surprising at all. The fact that we can't find evidence of these people is an interesting issue. So this is the second point I would make. And it has implications for how we do research in the future. And that is most of the archaeological sites, are identified by looking at flaked stone tools. So a stone knife for butchering, or the core that the stone knife or the flake was attached to before it was removed with a hammer. So people are looking at hammer stones that you hold in your hand and bang on to a rock, and you knock off a flake, which becomes a knife. And that is the key evidence that people have been looking for. But what the wonderful work of Steve Holland and Dan Fisher is showing is that there's another kind of evidence, namely remains left from fragmented bones, which also have a diagnostic signature of manufacture. And this is not just a one-handed hammer, this is an 18-kilogram hammer. This is not carry-on baggage. This is the heavy thing that you check in. It's a two-handed hammer that you bang on, and it requires a fair bit of precision to do that. So it's not macaques or some little monkey making this stuff. This is one of our people. It's our genus that is doing this sort of thing. But the task of looking for that kind of evidence, looking for these bone fragments, is precisely the thing that Steve and Dan are talking about in the future, and maybe those gaps will be filled.
Let's take another question. Do we have any additional questions? Okay.
What was the environment like 130,000 years ago here?
The question is, what was the environment like 130,000 years ago? Right here. You want to do that?
Well, it was an interglacial like we're in today. In other words, it was a period between glacial conditions. So it was warm. Sea levels were rising at that time. So between 130,000 to 120,000, sea levels were rising to a point actually above what sea levels are today. But 130,000 years ago, sea level was approaching modern sea level. So here in San Diego, or at this latitude anyway, conditions were not unlike what they are today, except we had this amazingly diverse biota of megafauna that I described earlier, camels and dire wolves and mammoths and mastodons. And capybara, too, yes.
Let's not forget the capybara. Any other questions? All right, if I can get our PR people to raise their hands one more time, you can, if you want an individual interview with one of the authors, please work with them. Thank you all for joining us today for this exciting news, and I want to thank the authors who have been laboring for 24 years to put this together for us, and we have many of them up here. Let's end with a round of applause for them.